This video is brought to you by Squarespace. 2021 has been a very challenging year. I would almost argue that 2021 was harder than 2020. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't a lot of good out of it. And yes, this is that time for reflection before we ring in 2022, the sequel to 2020, by looking at all the good. And I'm going to save all the bad for another video because you know I love to complain. But praise is given where praise is due. And it's not very often that we get to look back at blasters and talk about them again to see if any opinions have changed or anything like that, or if I'm still as enthusiastic about these releases months or sometimes just a couple of weeks after I've already done the video on them. Because believe it or not, I don't have months or weeks to formulate a review. It just doesn't happen. But because reviews are obviously edited, I do spend more time with the blaster than you would expect. And I have some opinions about a few blasters, and I just want to gush about cool stuff. And I encourage you to reach out in the comment section, especially if there's something that you're curious about that I have featured on my channel that I didn't talk about here, because a blaster missing from this list does mean that it's probably in the bad blasters category, but it also means it probably just wasn't very exceptional. I didn't really have a whole lot of things to say about it. And if you're curious what my opinion is about that, well, go ahead and leave a comment down below and I'll probably answer it, because I read all of my comments, for better and worse. So let's take a look back into 2021 and talk about some blasters, both NERF, BuzzBee, Zuru, Worker, companies I've probably never even talked about. Basically all the blasters and things that I loved this year that I still love at this exact moment, and why. Because this is going to be fun. I finally there's things I want to talk about that I can't normally fit in. I can't just sit down and do another video on the thing, you know, nobody's going to watch it. So this is going to be fun for me. There is no list or order for this. I basically just wrote down everything I wanted to talk about, but there's no actual guideline past that. I'm going to start with one of my favorite blasters, maybe my favorite blaster of this year, once I did some modest upgrades to it, very simple ones, and that is this Conquest Pro. Because holy crap, the Conquest Pro, in my opinion, is far superior than basically every other Pro blaster that came before it. Now, the stock Conquest Pro is absolutely incredible in my opinion. It has a completely unique design that makes it enthralling to use. It fits a niche that you may not have a use for, or it may be something that you want to heavily invest into. It is a blaster that's both perfectly capable of being an absolutely amazing primary and an excellent secondary, and a true secondary at that. It's a compact size, pump action, slam fire, magazine fed. It may not be the fastest reload in the world, and the rear loading gimmick and all the moving parts that go with it does make it somewhat of a hectic prime. However, it works good. It has slam fire, which I'm a big fan of, which makes it an awesome secondary if you want to just spam darts with it. And the relatively short length and thinness of the blaster makes it easy to stow somewhere on your body if you want to lug another blaster around as a primary. I love the Conquest Pro. I personally love it a lot more than the Nexus Pro. Pump action, in my opinion, is not all that important, but pump action on the Conquest Pro makes a lot of sense. However, it has room for improvements, and that's where these upgrades come in. These are both done by JRC Designs. I'll have a link, hopefully if I can find it, down in the description below where you can either buy or download the files for this, but there are two parts here. There's a new pump grip, a horizontal pump grip. That makes this thing a heck of a lot nicer to use. It doesn't have a grip up here that kind of gets in the way if you're trying to hold it somewhere on your body. It's a lot more comfortable in my opinion, although I personally like angled foregrips. But it is so much better, and might I say JRC Designs has some really astonishingly good print quality. And the second piece is the mag release. It's a little lever that just connects to the original mag release. So if I shove a magazine in there, instead of having to reach awkwardly up here and pull on that side, I can just easily reach my finger over and jettison out the magazine, which means it's much quicker to reload than it was before. And you can get really effective at that. It doesn't have a stock. People have made stocks for them. I think that kind of takes away from the shortened design that is the Conquest Pro. And with that, putting a stock on it would lean it more towards being a primary. I think this is perfect. I think they could probably do a little bit better with the design, but I love Conquest Pro for $40. I would recommend it higher than the Nexus Pro on my list, but that is my list. The Ultra Amp / Ultra Focus. Now, these are blasters that shoot the new Ultra Dart, which isn't exactly well favored in the community, but I would argue that the new Ultra AccuStrike darts actually make Ultra a compelling dart type. That is to be said, compelling in the fact that it isn't shooting short darts. Short darts have spoiled us, and honestly, if you have access to Nexus Pro, Aeon Pro, the Pro Series in general, and short darts, if you happen to live in the US or a country that sells these things, that's probably your go-to for everything if you want good performance and power. The cool thing about Ultra is that, like, you can get really good performance out of it, and the Ultra Pinpoint gives you the accuracy that normal Ultra lacks, while on top of still being a relatively safe ammunition. It doesn't impart a lot of kinetic energy, which I happen to be a big fan of. That makes it much safer for a kid to wield one of these blasters and shoot at another child than for them to have two Nexus Pros and put somebody's eye out, because those things actually hurt getting hit, while you feel almost nothing with the Ultra Dart. But on top of that, you have the Kiryaka upgrades for the Ultra Amp and the Ultra Focus, which is essentially the same blaster, which means you can get a stupidly high performance flywheel short dart shooter. This modified Ultra Amp is still the best blaster by far. Clocking in at sometimes over 230 FPS, Kiryaka's modification kit for the Ultra Amp is absolutely amazing. So it's a competent mag-fed strife alternative for the Ultra line that also has some pretty deep modification potential at a relatively accessible price point. The Rival Curve Sideswipe. Now, Curve is one of those weird things that you either love it or you hate it. Most people were rather indifferent on it. The Sideswipe is the standout in my opinion. Not only is this thing absolutely svelte, it looks amazing, it has all the right angles, and it's really easy to have that slung somewhere on your body. I mean, there's really no sharp edges anywhere on this thing, and it has that beautiful internal magazine, which I'm a big fan of. The curve system in general isn't bad. The Sideswipe actually makes the curve system compelling because this is a blaster that can be used, in my opinion, although it needs to be tested, in both normal gameplay, and this is something that still needs to be tested. I'm purely theory crafting. This blaster could have a gimmick in competitive play, because a lot of more competitive Nerf, especially with high-powered blasters, result with people sitting behind chest-high walls. The curve, with its downwards tomahawk spike of a shot, you know, that whole shot that no other reviewer seemed to pay attention to, and I almost didn't think anything of it until I did it accidentally in a video and loved it, means that you could very easily spike around over cover, and it's fairly consistent at that. This means potentially the Sideswipe, which I just bought 3 more of them a couple of days ago for $8 a piece, has an amazing role as a secondary blaster. And because it looks and functions really good as a stock blaster, maybe with a little bit of modification potential, although I haven't seen a whole lot, and trust me, I want to explore that modification potential pretty heavily, I give the curved Sideswipe a pretty hefty recommendation. The Dart Zone Tomahawk 60. Now this is a very interesting pick because this blaster is phenomenal for a stock player, but it doesn't really have a whole lot of modification potential, and that's something that has changed since my review came out. The Tomahawk 60, as far as I can tell, works flawlessly. The drum is pretty good. People have kind of figured out there's other ways that you could load darts into it that doesn't absolutely destroy the darts, which I should have picked up on in my review, but I saw other reviewers that didn't, so don't fault me so much for that one. 60 darts, semi-auto flywheel at that price makes it an absolute HVZ monster. And you could swap out drums pretty easily with it, which makes it even better. And with relatively high stock performance off AA batteries, it has a lot to be loved. However, the Achilles heel on this blaster is the fact that the flywheel cage is molded into the shell of the blaster. That doesn't mean it's impossible to modify, but that does mean it's relatively more difficult to modify, which is a bit of a bummer. For stock HVZ, especially if you don't want to run mags, and I don't blame you if you don't, because I personally don't like mags, you could top this thing up on the fly, and you can even swap the entire drum if you need. Plus, semi-auto means that you can time your shots perfectly and not waste a whole lot of ammo, with a huge capacity and power to boot. I give the Tomahawk 60 still a very high recommendation, although it is very difficult to mod and it probably won't be good for anything other than stock. The Hyper Rush 40. I want to talk about this because a lot of people hate hyper. Rightfully so, it's kind of an ecological nightmare. We don't really know what would happen to hyper rounds if they've been sitting around in an area outside for months, if not years. Will they disintegrate, or will they just sit there and be perfectly preserved? That's an experiment that we still need to test. However, the Hyper Rush 40, while not being anything other than a hyper blaster, has a pretty good potential for being one of the better secondaries in the hobby. I'm not saying that it's going to be a reliable one because it's a hopper-fed blaster, and reliability is something that you really can't put a price tag on. However, I have seen these things shoot pretty consistently, and if you add a hop-up to it, which there are 3D printed options, or Luchathor made his own out of a piece of PVC and a screw, you can have a steady 30 to 35 round pistol that there's literally nothing else would even fit into this category when it comes to range, power, and capacity. Seriously, it can't be stated that this thing has a high capacity and a good range for like 30 bucks, if not less, on sale. And it's a small blaster, being a little bit bigger than a Chronos. So there is a lot to love with the Rush 40, but if you fill it full of too many rounds, it's not going to work very well. And of course, unless you actually do something about that hop-up, it's always going to be a very inconsistent blaster when it comes to accuracy. I have a pretty middling recommendation, but it has a niche that cannot be ignored, and that's why it's on this list. The Worker Swift. This is the blaster that if you really liked your Nexus Pro and want to go beyond, is probably your best option. The Swift kind of ticks all the boxes for that almost end game level of performance from a pump action Springer blaster. It looks good, it's injection molded. You have the option of using a variety of springs and barrels, all of which can be easily swapped out with the included Allen key that's stored on the blaster and only takes a couple of moments to access. It has a wide FPS range, hitting anywhere from like 100 to 300 FPS. And while $200 is not an insignificant amount of money, it is a very compelling blaster, and honestly, $200 in a primary blaster isn't a whole lot. I mean, you take a look at the Nexus Pro, then you want to add a bunch of upgrade stuff to it, I doubt you're going to be hitting that 300 FPS, and you're probably going to dump just about as much money into it. The aesthetics and ergonomics are something that you either love or hate, but I have to say that the Swift is one of the best blasters we've ever gotten, especially from Worker. Yes, it had issue with O-rings, it had issues with screws that would break, and of course, dart gate, where the dart gate that held the barrel onto the blaster would break. All these things have been rectified in some fashion by Worker, and it took them a couple of months to get there, but that makes the Swift a really compelling option, and in my opinion, still probably the best upgrade if you're planning on going pretty high-end with your nerfing experience. And right next to the Swift, I want to point out the S100. This is a blaster that I didn't really know what to expect when it was sent to me by Monkey Mods. This is from a company I had no idea of, and honestly, I didn't know what to expect when I got this blaster, but after having it, especially from the review and afterwards, I kinda love it. It has some problems. It honestly has more problems than the Swift, although it does come in at $50 cheaper. You do still have to put it together, and that's not exactly a pleasant process, although always building a blaster helps you understand what the blaster is and how it functions, which could help you in the long run. While the Swift lowers its priming weight by having an obnoxiously long prime, the S100 has ball bearings on the slide, which makes it far easier to prime. It looks cool. The barrels are friction fit. I don't even know how that works because mine works flawlessly. Swapping out springs is not exactly fun, although doable, and it hits those high performance marks if you're looking for that. My concern is durability, but just like with the Worker Swift, this is something that could already have been rectified or something that could be fixed within the next year. So this is a blaster I would pay attention to if you're interested in that high-end nerfing, because saving 50 bucks is something that is worth talking about, especially when the blaster looks and functions as well as the S100 does. Here's a random one, my Gunpower SMT. This is not a blaster, but my goodness, is this one of the best purchases I have ever made. In fact, it's such a good purchase that I looked online and the thing costs more money now than it did when I bought it. Thousands of shots later, the thing is still going strong. In fact, it recently slammed into the floor about as full force as you could possibly get it to, and it's apparently survived no problem. I hacked mine to have video out so I can live stream the footage off of it, or just record footage off of it. And while this is definitely not a product for basically anybody who's not a content creator, it was so worth it for me. If you're a rich kid and you're really into Nerf, honestly, you might have more fun with something like this than you would a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox One. And you can connect it to the internet, download updates for it, and buy new software for it, which is pretty freaking rad. I'm fighting myself right now to not buy 2 or 3 more of them. I'm not even joking. It is so freaking fun. It is probably the most fun that you can have with a Nerf blaster by yourself. And if you get friends over and have competitions with a variety of games on it, it's so good. I love it. You will see it a heck of a lot. I can't recommend it enough, although it is certainly not for everybody. The Ultra Select. This is a blaster that kind of changed the pathway for Ultra in pretty much everybody's eyes. This was the first blaster to have the NERF Ultra AccuStrike darts, the silver bodies with the red heads that are far more accurate and usable than the previous generation of NERF Ultra. And I swear to Crom, Hasbro, this better be the standard going forward. I hope to not see 2022 blasters that come out with the original NERF Ultra darts. Those shouldn't exist anymore. They should just be dumped and forgotten. Ultra AccuStrike is a heck of a lot better. The Select looks cool, and the Select has a gimmick that we haven't really seen much in Nerf. In fact, the only other blaster I can think of that has what the Select has is the old BuzzBee Mutator, which yeah, I think the Select's gimmick works a lot better. Is it perfect? No, not in the slightest, but it is still usable. It's still something that could be technically competitive, and I feel like the Select has a bright future for that. In fact, I'm really surprised I haven't seen more modifications of the Select yet. The 2-mag system is wonderful, and even just as a stock blaster, the Select has a lot to offer. If you can find one for under its $60 MSRP, I would recommend picking one up, especially if you haven't dabbled much with Ultra yet. I love how it looks, I love how it functions, and I absolutely love the gimmick. I love the Ultra Select. Mega XL. Pretty much all of it. I think Mega XL is one of the greatest things Hasbro has ever made. I'm not even joking. I love Mega XL. A lot of people really like Mega XL, at least in the hobby. It seems like Mega XL is really popular in our hobby, less popular with normies. These big blue meaty darts have just the coolest aesthetic to them. They are big. They are chunky. They fly through the air with glee, sometimes hitting their targets, often not. But they're durable, rigid, and they're just massive. The Big Rig is a pretty mediocre blaster in my opinion, although it's kind of cool that they have a front loader existing in the ecosystem right out of the gate. The Double Crusher is totally fun, it's unique, and it makes it kind of the weird, like, secondary of the entire line, even though the entire line, when it comes to being a competitive or just fun game mode thing, is essentially relegated to being a secondary. But then there's the Boom Dozer. It's absolutely ridiculous. Massive slam fire, shoots the big old darts from a 6-round turret. It's the biggest friggin' pump action Maverick there's ever been, and I love it. It's pretty hard not to have fun with Mega XL, and I really hope we see some cool stuff come out from Hasbro with this line. Of all the stuff Hasbro put out this year, I think Mega XL is the one that unanimously people seem to really enjoy it when they get their hands on it. But it was also pretty freaking expensive when it first launched. Squarespace makes building websites easy, even if you have no idea what you're doing. If you can click and drag pictures, you can now build a website dedicated to whatever you want and have it look clean and professional. Let's say you don't even know where to begin. You can simply use their template starter and pick what you want the website to do and what kind of genre you'd like the website to represent. Let's say you're doing it for Walcom S7 or Fuzzy Walrus Industries. I'm a YouTuber, but maybe I'd like a nicer website landing to explain who I am, what I do, or have a nicer place to market my merch that nobody knows exists. But let's go deeper. Say you're the creator of 3D printed blaster parts and pieces and already have an Etsy site up but want more room to talk about your projects, maybe have a blog to show currently work in progress stuff, and even tie all that into your YouTube channel. Squarespace's tools let you integrate all your Etsy listings, add in a blog, buy a domain for a website, have member-only access to your files, set up email campaigns, and all without ever needing to know how to actually do anything more than select pictures and write in boxes. You can even preview how it looks on mobile devices, and Squarespace automatically formats your content for both large and small screen sizes. Head on over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Walcom S7 and save 10% off your first purchase of either a website or a domain. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. The Fortnite Six Shooter. This is something that I honestly didn't talk about a whole lot because I kind of squeezed it into another video, but this is the best hammer shot I've ever gotten my hands on, and that's coming from somebody that historically doesn't really like the hammer shot. For one, it's a hammer shot that I can actually like point and still prime. That's not something that I can normally do with a hammer shot, and it's something that a lot of people like brag about them being able to do, and I know a lot of people can, but I've also seen people that are massive hammer shot fanboys that every single time they prime their hammer shot, they go like that, which is fine, but when you're actually like aiming at someone, that's not exactly great to take your blaster completely off target every single time you want to fire it. The Six Shooter is much more comfortable. You can of course just tear off this barrel and not use it, and it's actually compatible with a lot of aftermarket hammer shot parts, which makes it even more desirable. It's comfortable with a paint job and look a heck of a lot better than 6-shot capacity. It's the best hammer shot. It really is. This is if you like a hammer shot, this is something worth getting. If you didn't like the hammer shot for much of the reasons I didn't like the hammer shot, this one may be worth picking up. Sure, it's got the big Fortnite logo, but that's on the barrel that you can easily take off or not attach at the very beginning, and yeah, I can live with that. The Pew Pew from PewTech. This is, without a doubt, one of the best blasters we've ever gotten in the hobby. Yes, it's 3D printed. Yes, it's going to be virtually impossible for you to get one because they're literally being handmade by one person 3D printing them, and yes, it is monstrously expensive. But in my opinion, it is worth every cent. Is this a blaster absolutely every single person has to have? No. Does it offer you a huge technical advantage at every single Nerf war? No. Is it the Swiss Army knife of flywheel blasters? Yes. Yes, it is. It's the best burst fire blaster I've gotten my hands on. It's one of the best full auto blasters I've gotten my hands on. It's one of the smallest flywheel blasters, if not the smallest flywheel blaster I've ever gotten my hands on. It's comfortable, it's quick, it's customizable, it's the Pew Pew, and I absolutely love it. Its diminutive size, raw performance, and sheer customization is what makes this thing freaking amazing. It's one of the last flywheelers I may ever need. And rounding out the back end, something I did want to talk a little bit more about, that is, of course, the Dart Zone Pro Mark III. The Mark III is the first flywheel blaster in the Pro line. It is select fire between semi-auto and full auto, and it can hit 150 FPS off AA batteries. A lot of AA batteries, but AA batteries still. It's big, it's chunky, it's rather comfortable, and you could use both full length and half lengths in it. And honestly, the price tag is less than I would have expected from a product like this. And the fact that out of the gate, they built the blaster to be pretty much hobbyist inclusive by letting you literally remove one screw to access a battery tray that can be easily lifted out and removed with an XT60 connector, the popular battery connector of LiPos already used in the hobby, and the fact that it works flawlessly off a LiPo just being thrown in it out of the gate. That is incredible. Is this like the end-all flywheeler? Not even close. Although you can make it maybe hit 180 using full-length darts on a LiPo battery, that still doesn't compete with a lot of the really high-end flywheelers out there like the ones I've talked about, such as Kiryaka's Ultra Amp Kit, which can hit up to 230. You also have to pretty much modify every single part about the flywheel cage in order to get it to work better, which people have put out cages for already, but I feel like that's kind of missing the point because now you're putting a lot more time and money into a blaster that you could honestly just get a Strife or a Rapid Strike or a lot of other things and do essentially the same amount of work to get essentially a better performing blaster, in my opinion. No, what I think makes the Mark III actually super special is the fact that it can hit so hard on AA batteries. That's a big deal. Sure, the full auto is slow and lethargic and really not even worth using, but the semi-auto feels good. And the fact that you can get that 150, 160 FPS using just AA batteries, mag-fed, yeah, that's what this thing's good for. If you want to modify it, sure, go ahead. I highly don't recommend it. If you have a use for a AA battery mid-performance, kind of almost end-game flywheel blaster, the Mark III has got you covered. However, I'm gonna lay it out on the table. There's absolutely no way that we won't get essentially the same blaster, most likely with the full auto removed, probably in a better shell, maybe, hopefully, only shooting half-length darts thrown in Walmart or something like that. It's gonna happen for probably like a $60 or $70 price tag. The same cage, the same battery system, just without all the extra stuff. It's gonna happen. It's gonna be the Strife of the Pro line. That's gonna be a far better choice, in my opinion, than this thing, because the full auto is really not good. And hey, we're still open to getting the absolute best flywheeler we can out there. I know it's gonna take a little bit of money and a little bit of engineering, but we really do need a flywheel platform that has maybe even its own dedicated battery system for the pusher, so you can get that full pusher momentum without having to bog it down with the flywheel system. It needs to have select fire between full auto, burst fire, and of course semi-auto. And I would really appreciate one that has a built-in, essentially, chrono barrel. I would love to have that system where I can see how many darts I have left, counting up or down, and have it customizable. I don't really care. Maybe even tell me the velocity of the darts coming out of the barrel. Put a screen on there. Put it somewhere where I can easily see it on the blaster without having to, like, not look down the sights or something. Make a sight that has the screen built into it with a little reflector. Like, I know this sounds like crazy madman logic, but Hasbro, Dart Zone, these are companies that could do this for a relatively cheap amount of money and sell it for a lot more. I would love to get the perfect blaster. In fact, Hasbro still needs to make a blaster that has essentially the regulator, chrono barrel, and infinite all built into one thing. But we haven't got that yet. I'm willing to pay the money. I'm sure a lot of you are willing to pay that kind of money. Dart Zone, answer my prayers. In fact, I really like the idea of having that optic where you have a little LCD screen that's backlit and have it reflected in the optic or something like that. So if you're looking down the sights, you can see like the ammo counter and stuff on it. God, that would be so cool. Oh, like, it sounds like a lot of money, but I know these companies can do it because they're gonna make a million of them and they can drive prices way down. And honestly, in my mind, those are all the things that really stood out to me this year. 2021, on paper, had a lot of blasters released. A ton of blasters released, which is funny considering we were still spending most of it in a global pandemic. Yes, we kind of had that break there a little bit from, I want to say, like April to July, but then after that, things started going downhill, and right now, from the looks of it, we're still in that going downhill phase. Who knows how 2022 is going to be? And unfortunately, a lot of the blasters that we got this year were also either just mediocre or just plain bad. I'm not going to say this is one of the worst years in NERF. In fact, I think it's one of the better years we've ever had in NERF, but it wasn't because of NERF. But of course, what was your favorite blaster of 2021, and was it on this list? Or do you dread it's going to wind up in the upcoming bad blasters of 2021? The things I hated about 2021 when it comes to foam flinging. Stay tuned for that one. Get subscribed. Other than that, I'm Walcom S7. Thank you very much for watching this video, and of course, I hope to see you in an entirely different one.
You gotta up,